So here on Daf Chav Hey, the Mishnah here on Daf Chav Daled Amud Beis had mentioned that in Yehuda, the Amei Haaretz are believed, are trusted on Tumah V'Tara with regard to Hegdesh. And that's the whole year round. So, for example, an Amei Haaretz would be believed to testify that this yayin is tahar, and we could use it for nesachim, or the shemen is tahar, and we could use it for menachos. With regard to truma, we're more machmir. But in any event, this credibility that's granted to an Amei Haaretz is limited to Yehuda. And the Gemara knows that Eretz Yisrael is divided into three parts. Divided into Yehuda, Galil, and Ever Yarden. So the Gemara says, "Yehuda in Yehuda we trust the Amei Haaretz to establish the Tara of Yayin and Shemen, of Kodesh. The Galil, the implication is low, they're not believed. My timer. Why aren't they believed in Galil? Why does the Mishnah limit and restrict their nemonos to Yehuda? Amar Lakish. There's a strip between Galil and Yehuda, which is occupied by the Kutzim. And the status of that strip is equal to Eretz Amamim. Meaning, even though the Kutzim are in a kind of ambiguous status, on the one hand, to some extent, they are Jews, but we treat them, as far as Tumah V'Tara is concerned, as Nachrim. And since in this Ritzua, this strip of land, the Kusim live there, we have a chash that once we enter into this land, it's like entering into Eretz Amamim. And in Eretz Amamim, we're always afraid that maybe, perhaps, they buried a stillborn, a fetus, under the ground, and therefore there was a gzera of Tumas Eretz Amamim. And this is a Mishnah at the end of Masechet Olos. Now, once we have this area, this Ritzua Shel Kusim that's between Galil and Yehuda, and that status in that Ritzua of Eretz Amamim, where there's a gzera of Tumah, Yerushalayim is in Yehuda. Somebody from the Galil, when he travels towards Yehuda, he has to cross over this Ritzua, this strip of land. And as a result, anyone who goes there becomes Tameh. So it's not possible, therefore, to bring from Galil Yayin and Shemen to the Beis HaMikdash and have a status of Tar. Because anyone crossing this strip would, by definition, become Tameh. And he writes here in the note that Lo nitan lahavi me'agalil lemigdash yayin v'shemen shel chaver mamakpidim al hatara. So it doesn't mean that in Galil there were no chaverim. Chaver means those who are careful about the laws of Tara. There were chaverim, but it's impossible to bring their yayin and shemen to Yerushalayim and maintain their nemanus, their credibility that it's tar, because by definition it's tameh. And why is it tameh? Because it crosses over the strip of Ritzua Shel Kusim. Now, the obvious question here is Aliyah L'Regel. We know that the people of Galil made Aliyah L'Regel. And now we're establishing that on the road, on the journey, they became Tameh B'Tumas Eretz Amamim. And that means that they would be required to have hazah b'shlishi u'b'shvi because of tumas mes in order to be tar. And this is the question that's raised by Tosfos Dibi Maschil Sheberitzua. Iksha Rav Rabbeinu Elchanan Heicha Yemevim Efer Para Legolim. Now we need the Efer Para for Hazah, Gimel, and Zion. The Efshal Asosel B'Yushalayim and came Nitma Bavas Derech Eretz Amamim. Then he has another kasha here. Hiksha Rav Rabbeinu Elchanan T'Sanya B'Tosef Eretz Amamim Tmeya B'Mikvaseha B'Shvilin Tmeya Eretz Hakusim Tahora, etc., etc. So there's an answer here in the note in the name of the Turei Even. He says, "Yitochen shebe'emes nitmu achik dimu laval Yerushalayim kidei lahaspik lahazos ulitoyer." That maybe enochinami on their way for Aliyah L'Regel, the Bnei HaGolil became Tmeim by crossing over this Ritzua, but they came early enough before the Regel to allow for the Hazah of the Efer Parah on Gimel and Zion before Regel. In any event, the Gemara asks the following kasha: "V'nesiv b'shida teva u'migdal." Why do you say that it's impossible to bring the yayin and shemen from Golil and maintain its status as tar? Why couldn't they bring it through airspace without touching the ground of this Ritzua of Eretz Amamim, the Ritzua of Kusin? They could bring it inside a carriage, a Shida, Teva, Umigdal. Shida is a box that's made of wood and it's attached to a wagon. A teva is also made of wood, like something that is used by the money changers. They put a teva in front of where they sat. A migdal is also some sort of aron of eights. All of the above, shida, teva, migdal, have the status of an oil. And now they can travel through the Ritzua of Kusim without becoming Tomei. Why? Because an oil is not Makabel Tumah. Again, we have to see about the sugya called oil zaruk, which means an oil in motion. But right now, the Gemara is assuming that an oil flat, period. In all cases, an oil is not Makabel Tumah. And therefore, it's chotzetz between the person who's traveling inside the Shida Teva Migdal and the ground of Eretz Amamim. So the Gemara so now again, we don't know why the Bnei HaGolil are excluded. And the Gemara answers, Hamani, our Mishnah is reflective of the sheet of Rebbe. The Omar oil zaruk lav shmei oil. A movable oil hamitaltel, is not considered an oil while it's in motion. And therefore, if it's not an oil, it's not chotzes shmei atuma. And therefore, even the people who are traveling inside the Shida Tevo Migdal will contract Tumah. And let's say, for example, they are carrying shemen or yayin in various utensils and vessels, kelim. Those kelim are also constantly moving from place to place as they traverse this Ritzua Shel Kusim, and there's a Gzeir of Tumah even with regard to these Kalim, because it's an oil hamitaltel. Tisanya, we learned in the Brisa, Nichlas li'eretz Amim b'toch shida teva migdal, Rebbe mitami Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Yehuda mitayer. According to Rebbe, shida teva migdal, since they're in motion, they do not serve as an oil achotzetz. And therefore, if somebody enters into Tumas Eretz Amamim through any of the above Shida Tivo Migdal, they would be contaminated. They would contract Tumah. The Gemara is still not happy. V'laisua, why not bring the yayin and the shemen in kli cheres? And here we have to learn a parsha in Chugas with regard to tumas mes. The Torah says that if you have a kli cheres that's mukaf samid pasil, and the Torah says in Parshas Chukas, v'chol kli pasuach asher ein samid pasil olav tamehu. But if there's a samid pasil olav, it's some sort of closure, a lid that closes the kli cheres, then that which is inside the kli cheres is not makabel tumah. And basically, the kli cheres now serves as a chatzitza between tumah and anything inside the kli cheres. Therefore, if they were to take the yayin and the shemen inside a kli cheres that was samid pasil olav, the shemen and the yayin, even though they're traversing the airspace of the Eretz Amimim, would not contract tumah. So that seems to be a very simple solution to the problem of the Ole Regel from Galil crossing the Ritzua and maintaining the Tara status of the Shemen and Yayin. Shemen for Nesachim and Yayin. I'm sorry, I got that wrong. Shemen for Menachos. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, fine. I said Shemen for Nesachim. It's Yain for Nesachim. Sorry. Amar Rabbi Eliezer, Shonim. We were taught by Tanoim in a Brisa, Ein HaKodesh Nitzal B'Tzamid Pasil. And I suspect that this is a D'Rabbanan, a Din D'Rabbanan. In the footnote, he quotes the Turi Even, who says that maybe this is a Doraisa halacha, derived from a Kavachon. But in any event, the Be'iri for sure goes on record as saying that this is D'Rabbanan, and the Rabbanan made a Gzeira that if you have something that's Kodesh, then a Tzamid Pasil would not save it and protect it from Tumah. So let's say, for example, they were to put Shemen or Yayin inside these Klei Cheres, Mukaf, Tzamid Pasil. And at that moment in time, it's Chulin, but then they were Magdashit. And the halacha is, if they were Magdashit, then the D'Rabbanan halacha applies that there's no Hatzalah Minatuma that could be afforded by its Tzamid Pasil, and they become Tami L'Mafreya. So therefore, the Yain and the Shemen that pass through this area, this Ritzua, which is Eretz Amavin, according to the status, would now become Tami L'Mafreya once they were Magdish. And again, the purpose of the Yain was for the Nesachim, and the purpose of the Sheva was for Menachos. So the Gemara is right now satisfied with this answer that there's no option of using a Klicheres Mukaf Tzamid Pasil because we're talking about something that he's going to be Magdish L'Mizbeach. And with regard to Hegdesh, we have the statement of Rabbi Eliezer that there's no Hatzalah through a Tzamid Pasil. So we're now in good shape. But the Gemara doesn't like it. Why? Basanya, we have a brisa. Ein chatos nitzeles b'tzamid pasil. If you have mei chatos, which is efer paraduma, it's mixed together in a concoction with mayim, it cannot be protected by a tzamid pasil. Now, why does this brisa single out Meichatos. My love, doesn't the Brisa seem to indicate that dafka meichatos eina nitzeles al yidei tzomid pasul? Ha kodesh, a regular hegdesh nitzel, says lo. Ha mayim she'ein eino mukdashim nitzolim b'tzomid pasul. The Brisa is not trying to exclude hegdesh, but rather it's excluding mayim that's not mukdashim. So he filled up this tzomid pasul with mayim in order to mix and create this concoction of efer paraduma and to be mekadosh the mayim. But now he hasn't yet mixed it up with the meichatos, and therefore it's nitol b'tzomid pasul, and it's kosher for the kiddush of efer para. But in general, as far as kodesh is concerned, and this is an all-inclusive statement, is eino nitzal b'tzomid pasul. The Gemara is still not happy with this. We still should have a solution to the problem of bringing the shemen and yayin from Golil to Yerushalayim b'tara. V'amar ula chevraya midakon b'golila. There are chaverim who are careful about tuva v'tara in Golil, and they would be mitayer. In other words, they would testify to the tara of yayin and shemen, and it would be roy lahakriv v'beis hamikdash. Now it seems that Ula is describing a situation in in his time, and he lived way after the Beis Hamikdash was nechrav. So it's very strange that he's talking about the chevraya in Golil that are bringing shemen and yayin tar for the mizbeach. That's royal akrava when there is no Beis Hamikdash. So Rashi says that this is based on a principle called Shema Yibana Beis Hamikdash Biyama. In any event, it seems that the Chaverim in Golil would make sure to guarantee that their yayin in Golil, their shemen in Golil, was royal akrava of Beis Hamikdash. What do they gain by this? They're going to have to take it up to Yerushalayim to the Beis Hamikdash. They're going to have to pass through the Ritzua Shel Kusim. So what benefit did they have, and what agenda, what goal did they have by being careful about preserving the tara of the yayin and the shemen? And the Gemara answers, Meinichim. They didn't have any intention of taking them up to Yerushalayim for the Beis Hamikdash because they would memela become tamei when they passed the Ritzua. They kept this yayin and shemen in their position on the lock and key. And why? That Eliyahu is going to come. That's the hope. And he's going to discover for them a path, a shvil that's taught. So that even though there's a strip going across, let's say from east to west, separating Golil from Yerushalayim, but nevertheless Eliyahu would reveal to them where there's a shvil tar, so that they would be able to bring it up to Yerushalayim b'tar. But the bottom line is that Kol Zman Eliyahu hasn't come, there's no solution to the problem of transportation of yayin and shemen tar from Golil to Yerushalayim. That remains an impossibility. So even though there are chaverim in Golil that could testify that this shemen is tar and this yayin is tar, and we can certainly rely on them, no question about it. They're trustworthy, like they are regarding their counterparts of chaverim in Yehuda. But the difference is that there's no way physically that they can transport the Yemen, Yayin, and Shemen from Golil to Yerushalayim and maintain its tara. Now we go back to the Mishnah. There are situations in which we will trust the Chaverim on Truma, B'shas Hagitos, Nemonim Afal Truma. There's a period of time during the calendar year when they're busy pressing the grapes and creating wine, pressing the olives to create oil. And during that period of time, the kalim that they use for the pressing are kalim tahorim. And therefore, we can trust the chaverim even as far as truma is concerned during that period of time. For a mini, we're going to raise a stira from a Mishnah in the 9th parak of Taros, which addresses the case of an Ama Oretz. Hagomer Zeisov, right? He's now cutting down, harvesting his olives, and he wants to bring them into what's called the Beis Habat, which is the olive press. Yeshayar kupa achas v'yitneno li'oni kohen. He should make sure that he has one extra kupa, which is full of shemen, and designate it for an ani kohen. Okay, now let's see if we can understand this brisa and understand and appreciate why this brisa seems to contradict our Mishnah. We're talking about someone who is, again, we don't know why the brisa mentions an ani. That remains a question. We'll try to cover that later, but right now we're talking about a kohen. So we want to give truma to the kohen. We're going to designate a special kupa, kind of like a barrel for the kohen, for truma, and that kupa will contain shemen tar. Now, how do we know for sure that these zaysim, these olives, would not contract tumah, and therefore guarantee that the shemen that is extracted from these zaysim is shemen tar? And the answer seems to be machshirim. We know that fruits are not makabel, they're not susceptible to contamination unless they come in contact with one of the 7 mashkim. And that's called hechsher lekabolas tumah. What's going to happen is that the Ama Oretz is going to set up a kupa, and in this kupa, he's going to place dry olives, and he's going to guarantee that these olives did not come in contact with any other liquids, and therefore they're not mukshal kabul tumah. And the shemen that is extracted after the pressing the olives in that particular kupa will be shemen tar. From that shemen tar, the Ama Oretz will give truma to the kohen. He'll be mafresh truma from that kupa to all the other kupos of shemen in the Beis Habat. Now, we're not talking here in this brisa about shas hagitos. The brisa doesn't indicate that this halacha, which would guarantee for the Ama Oretz that he has shemen tar for truma, only takes place during certain times of the year. The stimas lashon habrisa seems to indicate that, in general, an Ama Oretz would not normally be believed for Tara unless he has designated a special kupa of zaysim that were not mukshal kabul tumah. His own nemanus, when he testifies that this is shemen tar, and therefore you could use it and be mafresh as truma, that would not be reliable. He doesn't have credibility. It's only because there was a designation of a kupa achas, of zaysim, that were not mukhshal kabel tuma, they didn't have any contact with liquids. That's when we can be mafresh truma and assume that the shemen is tar. But we cannot rely on the nemanus, on the testimony of the Amoritz. And we're talking even during Shas Habadim. I mean, the Brisa doesn't say, well, it depends what kind of time of the year it is. So even though we're talking about Shas Habadim, the Amoritz is not believed to establish the Tara of Truma, unless for this very exceptional case. And that's against our mission. Omer Rav Nachman lo kasha ha becharfe ha be'afle. Okay. So now we're talking about what we call Shas Habadim, when the Zaysim are brought to the Beis Habad, where they are crushed in order to extract the oil. And there are two periods of time. One period of time is called Charfe, and the other is called Afle. The earlier period of time is called Charfe, which means that we sort of like declare for the general population, this is the time period for Beis Habad. These are the early birds. And at that moment in time, then we believe that the entire tzibur, including the Ami Aretz, are going to be careful about Tumah V'Tara. But then there are zaysim that are brought to the Beis Habad in a later period of time. I don't know what's the opposite of early birds, late birds, I guess we'll call them, all right? And that's called in the Lashon HaShas, Afle. Afle means late. So you have most of the zaysim were already crushed, we've already extracted the oil. So it's no longer Shas Habadim. During the Shas Habadim, there's going to be like supervision and care taken, very careful care, that everything is done b'tara. That's during the Shas Habadim, and that was established by our Mishnah. The Brisa, when it restricts the nemanus of the Ama Oretz, because there's a kupachas, etc., that's talking about charfe, afle. Afle means the later zaysim after the Shas Habadim. So we're beyond the Shas Habadim. And then Amoritz is not believed. He's not trustworthy, except for one specific restricted situation. He's not trustworthy on Tara.
What's the logic for that?
I think the logic is that after most of the zaysim were already crushed, it's not the Shas Habadim. During the Shas Habadim, there was a general supervision going on amongst all the various Beis Habadim, Batei Habadim, I guess you'd say in plural, to make sure that all the Kalim were Kalim Tahorin. But now he's bringing Zaysim, and it's already late in the season. Most of the Zaysim have already been crushed. It's no longer the Shas Beis Habadim. Amalei Rav Ada bar Ava. Rav Ada bar Ava is trying to clarify what he heard from Rav Nachman. Kigon Mai. What would be an example of a scenario where they brought the Zaysim to the Beis Habad late, which he called Afle? So if Nachman says, Ke'osan shel Beis Avicha, that in your father's house they had a Beis Habad, and very often they brought the surplus Zaysim be'ichur, later, after the Shas Habad. Now, in the note here, he quotes the Siach Yitzchak. Rav Ada bar Ava is stopping. What was Rav Ada bar Rava vacillating about when he asked this question, Mai, Kegon Mai? He wasn't sure about what Rav Nachman was saying. That according to our Mishnah, when it's misachrim, mivim zeisaseyem, beichur, nechshav, whether or not it's considered shasabadim, it's not shasabadim. Oshe kavanasa lehefek, shemishnasenu machshivas azman hamuktam, sheichelu miktsas ham livtzar, ach lo as hamauchar. He had an idea that maybe there were situations in which the Amoritz brought their Zaysim earlier than the Shas Habad, the Eis Habad. But as far as Ichur is concerned, that was all included in the extended period of time of Beis Habad. So if Nachman answered him that the Zman that they would bring the Zaysim in Beis Aviv, which was a later period of time, that's already after Shas Habad. Now we have an alternative resolution of this apparent contradiction between the Mishnah as we have it here and the Mishnah in Taros. Rav Yosef Amar b'Galila Shanu, that the Mishnah in Taros would seem to completely undermine and reject and invalidate the credibility of the Amoritz as far as testifying on the Taros Yain B'Shemen, even though it's Shas Hagita and Shas Habadim, that is in Golil. Our Mishnah, which establishes that the Chaver is believed for Truma and to establish the Tara of the Yain and the Shemen during periods of Shas Hagitos V'Abadim, that's referring to Yehuda and Dafka Yehuda. And again, all this boils down to the discussion that we had before, that in order to get from Golil to Yehuda, you had to cross through Eretz Ha'amim. Esvei Abaye asked to Rav Yosef the following objection from a brisa that says, Ever Yayin V'Gol Harein Ki Yehuda, that there's no difference between the three sections that Eretz Yisrael is divided into, Yarden, Golil, and Yehuda. As far as the Nemanis of the Amoritz, Nemanim al Hayayin, they're believed with regard to Yayin for Truma, B'Shas Hayayin, at the time of the Beis Habad. Well, Beis Habad is really that's a term that's appropriate specifically to Zaysim and oil, but let's call it Drichas Hanovim. And they would dorech the Anovim in order to extract Yayin in the Gitos. You can actually visit some of these ancient Gitos, on the way to Makavim, that area, if you know what I mean.
Right.
V'nemonim al Hashemen b'shas Hashemen, meaning at the time during the year when they do the schita of Zaysim, to remove the shemen, to extract the shemen, that's the Shas Habadim, they are believed. And we're not differentiating between Evrei Yarden, Golil, and Yehuda. Avalo, they're not believed, al Yayin v'Shas Hashemen, to testify that the Yayin is tar during the period of time when they remove and extract the oil from the Zaysim. V'lo Hashem v'Shas Hayayin, nor are they believed to testify about the Tara of Shemen during that period of time of Drichas Hayayin, Hanovin. So what does that mean? Let's say you have an Amoritz who testifies that they themselves were Tahorim, they went to Mikvah, whatever they had to do, that Kalim were Tahorim, at the time that they crushed the grapes and removed the yayin. They're not believed because it's now Shas Hashemen, or the reverse is Shas Hashemen if it's Shas Hayayin. in any event, we see clearly from this brisa, says Abaye, that even in Golil, the Amoritz are believed b'shas hagitos u'b'shas habadim to establish the Tara for Truma, and that's against Rav Yosef. Elamachvarta Shanina Meikara. Therefore, the Gemara rejects this answer of Rav Yosef, and we revert back to the answer of Nachman that we brought earlier, that our Mishnah is talking about Taros of Zaysim that were brought to the Beis Habad li'achar. The Mishnah in Taros, li'achar, after they had brought most of the Zaysim and most of the Anof. The Mishnah says, Ovru agitos v'abadim ve'vilo chavet shel yayin lo yikableno heimeno aval minicha legat haba. Let's take a moment to review the Mishnah. Ovru agitos v'abadim. Yeah, here it is. So the zmanim of Gitos and Badim, Gitos for Yayin and Badim for Shemen, has passed. Hevilo, the Amoritz brings the Kohen, and of course the Kohen has to be makpid on the laws of Tara, either a Chavet Shal Yayin Shal Truma or Shemen Shal Truma, Lo Yikavlen Amen. Kohen should not accept this Truma from the Amoritz and consider it as Truma Tahora, because Truma Tmeya has to be burnt. Why? Because we're talking about Avru Gitos Vabadim. It's Shar Yemos Hashana. It's not during the period of time of Gitos and Badim. Avol Meinicha Legat Haba'ah. What the Amoritz is allowed to do is, he's allowed to leave the Yayin or the Shemen, B'Shar Yemos Hashana, wherever he leaves it, in the chavios, in these barrels, and wait until the Shas Hagat of the following season, and then give it to the Kohen, because in that period of time he'll be believed. Now wait a second, who are we fooling over here? The Kohen realizes full well that this chavis was really designated Shalom Shas Hagitos. Okay, so he held on to it until Shas Hagitos. But why would now we believe the Amoritz? Just because right now it's Shas Hagitos. The chavis was already filled up way before Shas Hagitos. Not only that, we're going to have a sugya now that we're about to learn, in which the Kohen is allowed to retain possession over the chavios until the Shas Hagitos, which is really strange. Again, this is the way the Chazal, organized the credibility of the Amoritz. The Kohen violated this din, the Kibla, and he received and accepted the chavis of Yain from the Amoritz after the Zman Hagitos. Just like we said in the Mishnah that the Amoritz himself could leave the chavis of Shayimos Hashana and wait until Shas Hagitos, even if the Kohen violated the law and received this truma from the Amoritz in the chavios, Shalom Shas Hagitos, he might be allowed to hold on to it until Shas Hagitos, and then Lamafreya assumed that it was tar. And what did it study as Suffolk? So I want to read to you a line here in the Masechet. He writes, Ha'im choshishim sheyishtem imenu kodem chas hagat. We might be afraid that the Kohen would take advantage of drinking the wine before the Shas Hagat. B'nimsa shasa yain truma shetmea misafek. It has a suffix tuma. We don't believe the Amaor Shalom b'Shas Hagat.
Right.
Well, should we say no? Let him lock it up in a cellar under lock and key, and we can trust the Kohen that he won't drink from it before the Shas Hagat. Amalahu. So now Rav Sheshes responds to Nisua. I'm going to prove to you from a Mishnah in Masechet Demai that the Kohen is allowed to maintain possession over the Chavis and wait until Shas Hagat.